Hey, everybody. Cloud migration is a top priority for everyone. And we're all looking to accelerate transformation across our organizations. Business leaders like you all need to figure out a way to embrace power of cloud as well as embrace AI at the same time. My name is Ravi Sudhakar Kambhampati. I lead AI and machine learning business strategy worldwide. I focus on digital natives and ISVs largely. Now, as we go and start looking at it, we know that 90% of our new applications which are going to be developed on Azure are going to have AI embedded in them. And as Gartner also says, 95% of new applications are going to be cloud native grounds up. But that brings a lot of problems as well for us. At one end, we would want to make sure that we optimize costs for each of our customers. At the other end, we also have to figure out how to solve those complexities which come along with the many data sets and many toolkits which we have on each applications. Now, we have also noticed that any normal company would have around 100 to 200 vendor relationships. Effectively, what it means is that a new vendor comes in, brings even more complexities beyond that. And that is what we would want to solve as we go forward on this scenario. And of course, cyber risk and security is paramount for all of those scenarios as well. So it always feels like a delicate balance between two ends. On one end, we have to address the top priorities affecting us yesterday, today, and maybe tomorrow. On the other end, we also have to figure out how can we be ahead of the curve, innovate in making our organizations AI ready. And that's where Azure comes in. Azure is a platform where you can balance both. This is where you can build solutions which are optimized, cost-effective, secure, and trustworthy. And at the same time, these are also the platform which will enable your developers to build amazing solutions with ease. Now, we know it's not always one which fits all. We know many people within your company have different needs, different skills, different requirements. In fact, external customers who are connecting to your solution might have their own different needs. Azure covers them all without compromising on security or at cost. Migration is a super hot topic. My colleagues Kiran and Safeena and I are joined together, and we are going to showcase how quickly you can migrate. I'm going to show you how quickly you can innovate on Azure, and Safeena is going to show you how quickly you can secure your assets on Azure. Let's take an example of a bank. And let's call this bank as Woodgrove Credit Union, where you have multiple applications showing up on many data sets and virtual machines on premises. So what I've done is, and your data sets could be coming from various different areas. You could have credit behaviors coming from a data warehouse system. You could have unstructured data from social media profiles, statements, quarterly reports stored in various different data lakes. Or you could have simple profile databases sitting together. This is too much of data, disconnected in the form of virtual machines, blobs, and data sets. And to make sense of all of this together, you have to bring them together. You have to make sense, you have to relate them together. And if you're able to bring them together, we can either create better experiences using generative AI, we can do data engineering, or we can do machine learning to gather insights from that data. I'll now demonstrate a very simple AI app, which connects to SQL servers and blob containers, which we have migrated to Azure from on-premises. Let's switch to the demo. And I wanted to show you and this demo is built with less than 250 lines of code. Effectively, what it does, I mean, most of this is error handling and stuff like that. But what it is doing is, in the backend, it is connecting to various different data sources. For example, I have all of these resources which we migrated from on-premise to Azure. I'm also using SQL servers migrated from on-premise to Azure and using Azure hybrid benefits so that I can save on cost in each of those scenarios. At the same time, like these are all the SQL servers which I have. I have the cognitive search indexes which are connecting to these SQL servers and figuring out what is the next step to be able to do that. I have databases which I've created online, and you can see all of these scenarios up there. Now, for the sake of just running this, I want to make sure that I deploy this application quickly in front of you, and I'll show you how this works out. Let's see how quickly this deploys. OK, the app is deployed. Now, this is a chatbot application which we have created. And let me ask a very simple question to this chatbot. And I'm going to say, what is a loan origination system? Now, this is expected to go to a SQL Server database. I've created a bunch of FAQ documents. I've loaded them in SQL Server. This is expected to go to a SQL Server database, pick exactly what my question is, and give me an answer as to what loan origination really means. And this is a credit union bank, so effectively what it means is that all those questions need to be answered from that point onwards. Now, this is very useful for a new employee in the company. Now, if I want to ask, could you tell me credit risks in an organization as per our research? Now, this is expected to go and pick up all of the 1,000 documents which we have in the blob database and figure out what that question really means. This is thinking right now. It is supposed to give me a response about all those credit risks which we as a company care about. And look at this. It tells me all the credit risks which it has, and it also tells me where it has received those documents, where it had retrieved those documents for me right now. Now, this is straightforward. All I'm doing is a RAG pattern, where I'm connecting to a data source. I'm trying to figure out what's the question which I've asked. Azure OpenAI frames it up, and I'll show you a quick architecture as to how this works. But effectively, what we are doing is connecting to a data source and getting that info. Let me ask a very different question. Can I disburse loan to, say, Christopher Evans? Now, at this time, this is going to go and figure out who Christopher Evans is. What is his credit score? Is that a good credit score or a bad credit score? It's also telling me that whether should we be giving the loan to Christopher Evans or not based on the guidelines which we have created for the organization. And how am I able to do that? I'm able to do that with some data sets in the backend. But effectively, it is connecting to SQL Server and making meaningful solutions for me out of all of this. Can we switch to the presentation, please? OK. Now, all of these data sets came together in order to make sense together. And that's what we were able to do. The application which we saw before was able to pull data sets and connect with apps which were sitting on different virtual machines. Some of them were running transactional SQL database. Some of them were on data lakes with blob storage with Azure Container Services. And all of them are run a bunch of documents which are located there. As I mentioned, I was also using Azure Hybrid Benefits to make sure that I don't incur too many costs about all of this. These apps were able to connect with so many services and give me a meaningful output only because they were co-located. The interaction times between them were very less. Now think about this. Each query which I fired has at least 4 or 5 interactions between each of them, which would have increased my egress costs and latencies quite a bit, substantially, and they would have added up. What we were trying to do is to reduce them. Second, all of these services are heavily guarded banking applications. Not my demo per se, but these were, if this was a real bank, they would have been heavily guarded applications. They need to be, they need to have organizational policies, they need to have security policies, they have to have proper access controls. Some of those, which Safeena, my colleague, is going to show you later in the session as well. And the third is the ability to scale. My data sets in this demo are smaller. They might have 50,000 documents right now. But think about this same scenario where I have policy documents which go in millions, for example. I have credit records which could go in millions, and each of those indexes have to scan through so many database indexes and SQL Server. Effectively, what it means is that we don't need all of that capacity to be available upfront to be able to do that. We should be able to scale up and scale down whenever necessary. And that's what Azure is able to provide you in that scenario. Once we have co-located, then I'm able to infuse AI applications into them. We can either do generative AI experience, which is what I demonstrated today, using Azure OpenAI for improving customer experiences, or we could also fine-tune a machine learning model to identify risk. With this, we're able to create collaboration platform for developers and data scientists to work together. This will help improve data quality and create quick experimentation scenarios. When you saw that example where I said, should I disburse loan to Christopher Evans, that OpenAI framed a response based on a query which it fired on a SQL server. When it went to the SQL server, it got that data, and the table was built based on a machine learning job which I had run earlier. Now, machine learning job was able to do that. I'm not a data scientist, I'm not a banker, but it was able to do that for me to be able to build up very simple solution for us to take it forward. Now, that's not all. While pace of innovation is important, for which everybody wants, we also want to make sure that everything what we do, we ground ourselves, and we want to make sure our solutions are transparent, fair, they're private, they're secure, they're reliable. And this is where our responsible AI guidelines show up. We follow responsible AI practices. We also have created tools, frameworks, and policies for you to follow to make sure that you are able to use responsible AI guidelines yourself. What I've shown you is a very simple use case for AI, but you can do a lot more. We have 3 key areas where we are seeing our customers use AI in their applications. One, we are seeing many of our customers using APIs and services to build these generative AI experiences, which I showed you on the screen earlier today. But we are also seeing customers who are training their own models, foundational models or fine-tuning models for banking, instrumentation, mechanical engineering, and automotive, all of those scenarios. And those are models which are being created ground up. And then lastly, you could also use machine learning, data engineering to be able to detect fraud, identify false situation, do predictive maintenance, and so on and so forth. All of these are possible when you're able to bring variety of these data sources together, reduce latency among each other, and are able to run them on a scalable and performant infrastructure. My app only came alive because we are able to migrate multiple VMs and databases and files from on-premise to Azure very easily. Now, I would like to call upon Kiran, my colleague, to show you as to how we are able to migrate them so easily in the first place. Kiran, over to you.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for making the case for migration with AI. Now, in this section, we look at how customers such as Woodgrove Credit Union can make their cloud migration journey real with Azure Migrate. My name is Kiran Madnani, and I lead migration, modernization, hybrid, and management for Microsoft. How many of you have heard of Azure Migrate? Okay, about 20, 30%. How many of you have used it in real life? All right, a few of you. So Azure Migrate is Microsoft's cloud platform, a service that we provide for free for customers and partners for their end-to-end cloud migration journey. Customers can leverage Azure Migrate for building a business case, building the ROI for migration to Azure, building a plan, selecting the right SKUs, right-sizing those SKUs, and understanding the costs associated with running their workloads on Azure, and then finally execute the migration at scale to get those workloads running on Azure. Azure Migrate works on workloads which are running on Windows or Linux, irrespective of what tech stack they're running on, whether it is on VMware, Hyper-V, bare metal servers, or even those workloads running on other clouds such as GCP and AWS. As part of the migration, customers can leverage different services on Azure, whether it's Azure IaaS services such as Azure VMs or Azure VMware Solutions, which is VMware running on Azure's public cloud, as well as modernizing their workloads to run on Azure App Service or AKS, and modernizing the databases to run on different flavors of Azure SQL. I'm now going to switch over to the demo to talk about, to actually show you how Woodgrove went about their cloud migration journey. So if you could switch over to the demo. And I'm going to play the role of a cloud engineer on Woodgrove Credit Union, navigating through the migration journey, leveraging Azure Migrate. So how does one get to Azure Migrate? Here we are on Azure portal, and I simply can type in migrate and get to the Azure Migrate service. And this is the overview page that provides you the different options available in Azure Migrate. I'm going to click on Discover, Assess, and Migrate, which leads me to the hub page on Azure Migrate, where I can actually discover my environment, build a business case, assess my environment, and execute the actual migration. So to get started, I'll click on Discover, And this will give me all the different options of my source environment, whether it's VMware, Hyper-V, physical, or other clouds. And then when I navigate through this, what it'll do is it'll deploy a software appliance in my source environment and go about discovering the entire environment. And we'll see the actual discovery in a second. Alternately, if I have my inventory already available, I can simply import it using the CSV format. Now, once the environment is discovered, in this case, in the interest of time, we've already discovered the environment. What we see out here is that I have 14 servers running in my environment, 7 servers running SQL, and 4 servers running web apps. Now, let's dive into the details out here to understand what's running in these environments. So what Azure Migrate has done out here is it's discovered all the different servers, the operating environments on those servers, whether those operating environments are in support, in extended support, or even out of support. And as we'll see later in the demo, if my application is out of support, I can actually upgrade it as part of the migration journey. So I can move from Windows Server 2012 that recently went out of support to a supported version of Windows, or I can even go back to Windows 2008 and upgrade that inline. Furthermore, as part of the discovery process, Azure Migrate discovers what's running on those environments. So we'll talk about the parts application. This is actually the credit risk application that Ravi demonstrated, and what's running on these. And in this, what Azure Migrate has discovered is there's 71 different applications that are running on parts, and it also discovers the app boundaries. It discovers what this parts application is talking to. So if I go to the dependencies view, what I see out here is that parts is actually a 2-tiered application, which is running SQL and for the data tier, and is running .NET for the business logic of the application. Now, this is useful as I assess my environment to run on Azure, because I can now see that these 2 different applications, or these 2 different components of an application, can be migrated together. Now, once I've discovered the application, the next thing I need to do is convince my leadership team, my CIO, that I should actually leverage Azure for running this workload, for migrating this workload and running this workload. So how do I convince my CIO? My CIO is a demanding individual. He requires, or they require me to provide all the details of what it's going to cost me, what the ROI is of running on Azure. So I can do so by building a business case for leveraging Azure, and by clicking on Build Business Case. I can specify the target location for running the workload. I can specify the migration strategy, picking what Azure recommends in order to minimize cost, picking a strategy to migrate to Azure IaaS as a lift and shift migration, or modernizing to PaaS. I pick the savings options, what I want to run, or select on Azure, whether it's a reserved instance or reserved instance with an Azure savings plan, and any discounts that I can expect from Microsoft. Now, once I provide these inputs, the Azure Migrate service will actually go and create a business case in a matter of minutes based on the discovered environment. In this case, I have pre-created some business cases, so let's go look at one of those. Now, this business case is built on a comparison of on-prem costs versus Azure costs, based on industry standard data that Azure Migrate collects and provides as input. However, my environment may be different, so I can go about editing some of these assumptions and provide what my environment looks like, what the assumptions in my environment looks like, and then build that comparison. Now, what the business case actually does is it provides a TCO comparison of running those workloads on-prem versus running on Azure. And what this business case is showing me is that I can save about 41% by migrating these workloads to Azure, which translates to about $182K over 3 years. It also gives me a projection, a cash flow projection of this ROI for if I migrate over 3 years. So over 2024, 2025, and 2026, I can save how I can go about saving and building the ROI for migrating to Azure. How do these savings come about? So I can see that I can leverage Azure's hybrid benefit, where by bringing my existing Windows and SQL licenses to Azure and save about 54K, leverage the extended security update capability. So if I don't want to upgrade my legacy OS and I want to continue to run my legacy OS in Azure, that works. Is also supported in Azure, and we provide extended security updates at no extra charge. Furthermore, if I want to drill into the details, I can go into the details and get a breakdown of the costs, comparing the costs of running on-prem versus running on Azure. I can see what the savings are on compute, storage, networking, security, which we'll dive into a little later with Safeena, IT labor and facilities, and we are also adding the capability to see management tooling savings for backup, for patching with Update Manager, backup with Azure Backup, and monitoring with Azure Monitor. And you'll see this light up in Azure Migrate pretty soon. All right, so once I've built the business case and I've convinced my CIO that Azure is the right target, I have the green light. The next step is to go about building an assessment, building a plan for migrating to Azure. And I can do so again from the hub page, and I can see the different assessments that are available to me. I can do a lift and shift, and I can select Azure VMs as a target. I can also select Azure VMware solution as a target and see what the assessment will look like for Azure VMware solution. Or I can modernize to Azure SQL, or for my data tier and for my web tier, I can select different options for web apps. So again, in the interest of time, I've created a few assessments. Let's look at some of these. So let's first go to the Azure VM assessment. And what I see here is an assessment that's been created where I can see the readiness of this two-tier app to run in VMs on Azure. I see that both tiers are ready to run on a VM, on different VMs, and I can see the costs associated with them for compute, storage, and networking and security as well. I can see the cost savings that I would yield as part of leveraging the Azure hybrid benefit. Likewise, if I want to modernize to SQL and I leverage Azure SQL, I can see a business case for that. I mean an assessment for that. So let's take a quick view of that. So this is again a pre-created assessment. And what I see out here is that Azure Migrate is recommending modernizing this workload or the data tier to run on Azure SQL MI. And what the cost associated with that is on a monthly basis, and the readiness for running on Azure SQL MI. And what we see is the app is ready to, the data tier is ready to leverage Azure SQL MI and other flavors of SQL. Now, if I want to modernize the web tier to run on AKS or run on app services, I have the assessments available for that. So let's quickly look at an AKS assessment. And what we see out here is that the web tier is ready to run on AKS and the estimated cost for that. Similarly, if I were to see the readiness for leveraging app service code as well as app service containers, what I see out here is that the applications, the web tier is not quite ready. It's ready with conditions, so I'll need to go and re-platform, change some settings, and I can learn more about that by clicking on the details. And I see that the app service requires some reconfiguration. Also, the web tier requires some reconfiguration to run on Azure App Service. So as a cloud team, we decide that we want to migrate to Azure as quickly as possible. So we pick the lift and shift option. We pick Azure VMs to run this application, and as a decision. So how do we go about doing that? Like, how do we go about the actual migration? Let's actually take a quick look at that out here. So I go back to the main hub page, and I can see that there is a tile for the migration and modernization journey itself. Now, the actual migration of the workloads is a 3-step process. I can first need to replicate the bits to Azure. Once the bits are replicated and ready for migration, I can actually do a test migration. So I know that the workload is going to run OK on Azure before cutting over and running the workload on Azure. And then I actually go through the migration process and run the workload on Azure. Now let's look at what this process looks like. So I've already replicated the VMs. I can see that the VMs are all ready and healthy, and that's the parts application that we have. I can select multiple of these VMs and do an at-scale migration. And finally, as I shared earlier, I can do an inline upgrade. So this parts application is running a legacy or 2016, but there are other applications running 2008 and 2012, and I can select the target operating system. Now do note that this upgrade process is a risk-free process, so the upgrade is actually done on a replica copy, or not on the actual bits. So if I'm not quite happy with what I see after the upgrade, I can always revert back to the old copy. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to kick off the migration, but I'm going to show you a migrated VM running on Azure. This is the parts application again, and this is post-migration. It is running on Azure. So as you can see, Azure Migrate provides customers such as Woodgrove an end-to-end migration journey from deciding what they want to, and building the ROI for running on Azure, to building a high-fidelity plan, and actually executing the migration at scale. And this is provided by a single service that simplifies a complex migration journey for customers. Now, how do customers such as Woodgrove keep their environment secure? I'd like to invite Safeena, my colleague, to talk about the security aspects of the migration. Safeena?
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here and seeing you all. My name is Safeena. I'm a principal product manager working in cloud security team. OK, so let's imagine you have already migrated your workloads to Azure. And this is just the first step, and you're just getting started. So what are the couple of things that you have to take care of? That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So firstly, you should be able to have a set of tools, and you should know the set of services that we have in Azure. By the way, as soon as you migrate to Azure, Azure has a number of services that you can use in order to do whatever operation that you want to do. And you're actually opening up doors to a variety of services that we have at Azure. And I'm going to give you an overview of all of them, at least most of them in this demo. So operations as a code being the first one. So this is one of the tools that we provide you with a number of sets of services called Azure Automation, Update Manager, Resource Manager, which will allow you to drive productivity in the cloud and in your organization. So if you would like to automate some of the repeatable tasks, you can use one of these resources, one of these services in order to do the same. Next, often we hear from customers that we have need for observability and resiliency, and that is what these tools are going to offer you with. So if you want to optimize your performance, or if you want to have visibility across all of your business critical workloads, then you should be using some of the tools that's been listed here in the slides. And we have some really cool new announcements that we are making at Ignite. Make sure you check it out at the expert booth. But we have Azure Kiosk Studio that's going in GA, and Azure Monitors.com managed instance that's going in GA. And there is another feature called Azure Business Continuity Center in the Azure Backup that's going in public preview. Make sure you check it out in the expert meetup. Now, the next one is governance. Governance is top of mind for every customer that's in Azure. So if you want to have governance at scale, then we do have a number of services that you could use for governance, where you can view, organize, or govern your IT inventory as your business grows. So these are the tools that you could use for governance. Azure Policy is one of the most popular tools in Azure. If you want to deploy your workloads seamlessly, then you use Azure Policy, and we have a number of scripts as well that you could use with the help of Azure Policy in order to do things in the cloud. And last but not the least, security. Security is always top of the mind. You can reduce the risk by continuous threat detection, and you can have role-based access controls. We do have Azure Active Directory, which we now call it as Microsoft Entra ID, that you could use in order to play around in the cloud. And the topic that I'm going to talk to you about and deep dive to you about is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So before that, no matter which use case that you're undergoing in the Azure, after you have migrated your workloads, we have services for that in Azure, and many of them are free. And on top of that, we do have a number of services that you could use. For example, cost optimization is one of the amazing services that you have in Azure that you could use to check what your cost looks like if you have onboarded, for example, a specific size of the VM, or if you have onboarded Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or you're using Azure Policies, or anything for that matter, you could use cost optimization. Now, talking about security, I want to talk to you about a specific tool called Azure Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Before I talk to you about this scenario, I want to check how many of you know about Microsoft Defender for Cloud. OK, that's amazing. That makes me happy. Cool. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a cloud-native application or a service that you could use in order to make sure how your security posture is doing in terms of your, as soon as you get your workloads to the cloud. So I've brought you a scenario here. This is a scenario which actually is 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Financial has this scenario as a challenge. They have, in terms of DevOps security, they have some public repos which are exploitable, and they have deployed some vulnerable images as well. So I'm going to talk to you about how Defender for Cloud is going to help you with that. Defender for Cloud has a capability to protect your DevOps services. So if you have some exploitable public repos, or if you have vulnerable images, then Defender for Cloud has this capability called infrastructure as a code statement, which will actually help you evaluate that, and it will give you recommendations so that you are able to fix all of those, and you should be able to good to go. Now, expanding this scenario, let's imagine you also have a VM which is internet exposed, and you have a couple of identities that are over provisioned, and also you have a database instance that has access to the sensitive data. If you look at it, this particular scenario is actually a treat to an attacker. They can always get access to the identity, and they can actually move around in your organization, and they can steal data or cause more damage. So if you were using Defender for Cloud has capability to give you data-aware posture management, so that you are, before even any damage happens to your environment, you should be able to know with the help of the recommendations that we offer you. Now, expanding this more, I'm bringing you another scenario. Let's imagine you have a workload protection where you have a storage account, and you have a storage account that you have probably public access enabled, or if you have a storage account that's exploitable and somebody actually uploaded a malware to that storage account. And that's another scenario that we always hear from the customers, that there is malware in the storage account that's uploaded. So if you were using Microsoft Defender for Cloud, we would have flagged you a recommendation or an alert right before you even got into this kind of a scenario. Now, that's one of the scenarios I wanted to cover, but as an overview, I just want to give you some background of what Defender for Cloud helps you with. Let's imagine you have already migrated all of your workloads. Now you want to protect your workloads in the cloud. Defender for Cloud offers you protection towards your compute, towards your storage, towards your Kubernetes workloads or containers, or even if you have, for example, if you haven't been able to convince your CISO, and if you haven't been able to migrate all of your environment. If you have some VMs or data still in the on-premise, you could still use Microsoft Defender for Cloud because it has the capability to scan your on-premise services as well. And also, we are multi-cloud, so if you have AWS or workloads in GCP, you should be able to scan those as well. We provide you recommendations and alerts and everything of that sort so that we keep you secure in Azure. Now, a lot of talking. I want to show you a demo of how Defender for Cloud looks like for the people who haven't used Defender for Cloud. I'm just going to ask Ravi to sign in. Thank you. Switch to the demo, please. OK. So this is one of the screens that Ravi was using. So all I'm doing is logging into Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And for those who haven't seen Microsoft Defender for Cloud, this is how it looks like. At the overview, you can see the security posture of your environment. You would be able to see how much score you have for Azure, AWS, and GCP. And what are the regulatory compliances you're using, and workload protections, and so on. So now, taking the same example of what Ravi and Kiran showed you, now I'm going to go to the recommendations that Defender for Cloud has fired up. So before, so these are the recommendations that Defender for Cloud has been able to find out for you. Every recommendation is being put into the security control, and it's been assigned a secure score for you, so that when you remediate the recommendations, you should be able to know how much score you're going to get it. So I'm going to click on all recommendations and show you some of the critical things that you have to take care of. So if you look at it, this particular SQL server that Ravi onboarded should have Azure Active Directory Administrator provision, which is not done yet. So Defender for Cloud is smart enough to identify this particular resource, and we are going to provide you a description and remediation steps so that it's easy for you to identify what the problem is and to remediate it. I have the capability to click further on this particular item, and this will actually take me to the SQL server and help me remediate it with the help of some remediation steps related to this resource and recommendation. So yeah, so these are the services that you have already migrated to cloud, and once you turn on Defender for Cloud, the Defender for Cloud is going to scan all of your resources, and it's able to provide you recommendations like these. Now, let's imagine you haven't taken care of this recommendation. Let's take this as an example. This is a SQL database that has a couple of vulnerabilities that has not been taken care of. And if you leave it just like this, you may have an attack later moving forward on this SQL database. And that will be shown here under Security Alerts page. So Security Alerts is the place where you can see all of the alerts that has been had in your environment. So you have the capability to remediate these alerts by actually looking at the alerts by clicking on, for example, potential SQL ingestion. So this is my affected resource, and this is my subscription. If you look at the 𝗦𝗽𝗀 attack, this is under the pre-attack scenario. Now, when you click on View Details, it's actually going to give me more information about what this attack is all about, where it is coming from, and things like those. So the way you turn on is by clicking on Environment Settings and clicking on your particular subscription. We have two types of offerings that we give you, Foundational, which is for free, and Defender CSPM is the paid version of it. If you haven't already used Defender for Cloud, make sure to at least turn on the Foundational CSPM capability in order to get more, to see the value proposition of it. And then once you have migrated your workloads, you should be able to turn on all of these so that you can get the recommendations and alerts and so on. So make sure you check this out. Over to Kiran. Thank you.
Thank you, Safeena, for the great demo. All right, so I'm just going to close this out now. As we talk to customers, we understand from them and from all of you that one size does not fit all. There are some customers who are looking to stay on premises because they have data center investments, or they have data residency requirements, or some customers don't have the cloud skills to move to Azure or leverage the cloud. At Azure, we provide offerings to meet our customers where they are, irrespective of whether they want to migrate or not. And I'm going to give you a little overview of how you can embrace Azure on your own terms. We talked extensively in this session about migrating apps, data, and infra to Azure, leveraging IaaS services, PaaS services, and DBaaS services on Azure. However, you can also migrate VMware as is and leverage Azure VMware Solution, which is VMware running in the public cloud. Or you could extend management and security to your hybrid and multi-cloud environment through Azure Arc. Now, no matter where you are running your workloads, you get the consistent AI, management, operations, development, and security capabilities that we offer via Azure. All right, let's double click into a couple of these options. So we have customers who have complex workloads that don't have the cloud skills, and they want to leverage their existing VMware environment as is. And to do so, we provide Azure VMware Solution, which is essentially the vSphere hypervisor and the VMware tech stack running on Azure. Now, the good part of this is there's no app refactoring required. There's no workload refactoring required. The customers can run these workloads as is on Azure. And they can leverage Azure subscription-based licensing for running their workloads on Azure and not worry about the VMware licenses as is. Alternately, as we talked about extensively, customers can modernize these workloads to run on Azure. They can leverage Azure compute, storage, and networking infrastructure for running their environments and not worry about their on-prem licenses for VMware. What we see from customers is that they use a combination of approaches as part of their cloud migration journey. For more complex workloads, they leverage AVS, while for other workloads that can be migrated or modernized, they leverage Azure IaaS and PaaS services. As an example, customers leverage Azure Virtual Desktop for their VDI environments, or they look at when they want to modernize their databases, they leverage Azure SQL and the managed flavors of Azure SQL running on Azure. Likewise, for customers not looking to migrate to the cloud at the moment, we offer Azure Arc, which is essentially extending Azure services to meet customers where they are. So customers can automate their tasks, repeatable tasks, by leveraging Azure Automation or Azure Update Manager. They can collect, analyze, and act on telemetry based on Azure Monitor, which is a native observability tool provided by Azure. Or they can organize and govern their on-prem resources or multi-cloud resources, leveraging Azure Resource Graph and Azure Policy. And finally, they can deliver cloud agility anywhere by writing their applications once and deploying it on Kubernetes clusters, running on Azure in AKS, or running on-prem and managing those clusters using Arc-enabled Kubernetes. So no matter where you are in your cloud adoption journey, in your cloud migration journey, Azure provides you capabilities, guidance, tooling, frameworks, funding, and access to subject matter experts for your scenario, whether it is innovating with AI or whether it is migrating and modernizing on Azure. I'd like to invite all of you to click on the QR code on the top of the slide to learn more about the resources. I'd also love to interact with all of you as part of the experts booth and invite you to take the hands-on lab to play with the services that we demoed today in real time. Thank you so much for attending this session. I appreciate you coming in and listening to us, and have a great rest of the conference. Have a great evening.